Hi, Mama.
Hi, sweetie. It is good to see you.
Good to see you too. Do you notice anything about my shirt?
I do notice that shirt. I feel that I had my eye on that. It has some giraffes, and I thought you needed it.
I
So it made its way across the country.
It sure did. I just got it in the mail today and I was like, what better time to wear it than now? So I'm really excited. I think it's super cute.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Good to see you.
Good to
So,
see
well,
you.
let's get started here. Welcome to the Mother-Daughter Download. This is a podcast where this mother-daughter duo meets at the intersection of leadership and sociology. So we're from opposite coasts, DC and LA, and different generations. My name is Lisa Yarusi, and the mom. For 20 plus years, I've guided leaders to navigate workplace disruption and build healthy cultures. And now I'm an executive coach and consultant, helping leaders cut through overwhelm so they may achieve their next level of excellence with a little bit of ease.
I'm Alex and also daughter, and I'm a sociology professor at Howard University, American University, as well as Prince George Community College. My work centers on identity, community, and equity. And together, my mom and I, we examine workplace dynamics through a human-centered and impact-driven lens.
So we're here to explore how can we be more curious, courageous, and connected wherever we might work and study. So we'll share some stories, some insights, and tools to help strengthen communication and inspire meaningful change at work and in life.
Yes. So our conversations are grounded in lived experience, research, and our ongoing growth and journeys. We're definitely not claiming any universal truths. We're just offering reflections and questions so that we can grow together. You'll find that any references and resources that we mention will be linked in the description of this video, so that you can continue to explore and reflect beyond this video.
Excellent. And I do a lot of that myself. But in our last two episodes, we explored the roots of professionalism, where it comes from, who defines it, and how it often reflects dominant norms. If you didn't see those, check them out.
Yes, absolutely. And so we're really excited because we got quite a few questions from our listeners. And so today we will be answering those questions about professionalism that we talked about in our last two episodes. So we're looking forward to delving into your questions from, again, listeners, friends, family, colleagues. The questions were really thoughtful and I'm looking forward to Mom and I kind of answering some of these questions because I think that we might have different views or perspectives on some of these, but I think that's what will make it fun. Of
Mhm.
course, if you have any further questions based off this episode or anything else, please don't hesitate to leave your questions or comments in the comments section or to email us at themotherdownload@gmail.com.
So the questions we received, and we did receive some really good ones, they have us centering on authenticity and standards, self-advocacy, changes due to working within a remote or hybrid work environment, and cultural norms. So we're really glad you're here and joining us. Let's get into it.
Yeah, so one of the first questions that we saw that is super important that we got from our listeners is how do I balance professionalism and authenticity in the workplace? And I think this is a great question because this is also a question I would have for you, Mom. So I'm really curious about what you think here.
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is what I want to start with. And not that I'm trying to correct the question, but I want to say this. I think whenever we're saying, let me find balance, we're trying to find something perfect, and I don't believe it exists. So I think I'm just going to tweak this a little bit and say, how can I integrate
Mm.
professionalism and authenticity in the workplace? Because we will shift and evolve, and that's going to happen again as the human beings that we are, and certainly the workplaces that we operate in. So the first thing that I want to share as we're reflecting on this, both as again, individuals, students, professionals, or leaders, is start thinking about who am I? So know yourself. what are your values? What's important in terms of how you operate? What are the things, of course, that have shaped you? Even, as we grow up and our lived experiences indeed shape us. So know what that is. Know the type of work that energizes you, excites you, that you want to experience. And another tool, and this is common within the workplace, is take part in those assessment tools that exist to further know yourself. Those are Myers-Briggs, a predictive index, DISC, and then there's a free one that I want to mention called the VIA Strengths Assessment. So just check out VIA Strengths and you can take an online assessment. This helps you know yourself. So those are your strengths and your values. Secondly, know your workplace. Learn about the culture, figure out what are their values and their operating principles in the work and the experience and culture and the learning and development they will offer to you. So that helps you begin to figure out, does that align with who I am and what I want? And I'm going to share an example of myself within work and where I thought, and this can happen, a lot of us do this. So I'm going to name myself. And I was working at a safety standards organization. So who am I? This is what I would share. I'm a get it done person. I work with zest. I like innovation. I like progressive HR work, like what's next, what's best. And I work with a sense of urgency. And we can even plug and put that aside. That might be a white privilege thing, but I'm still going to plug it and put it aside. Future conversation.
Yes.
So that's who I am, how I operate, my values. Then I'm in an organization, and if with the right questions and checking and asking and observing, it was low risk. It was very collegial. It was very slow to make a decision. It was all about consensus. So now if I just shared with you again who I am, my makeup, my values up against this organization, what might that tell you? And so that's a starting point. And then what I want to talk about, so that's, think about who you are, think about the organization. But then here, this is where it gets a little more nuanced. And I want to speak to those folks out there who are thinking about, all right, well, how do I grow? What's next? And then how do I still hold on to my authentic self? And the reality is this, who we are and how we operate, let's say in the decade of when we were in our 20s, is going to be different than who we are, the job we hold, the experiences that we've had, and then how we're operating, for example, in our 30s or 40s. And what I want to say is be open to that. Learn from that and don't think, oh, this is my one way and I'm going to stay this way, because it's not true. One other example I'll share about myself. I operate with limited patience. People who have worked with me, they know that. You're my daughter, you might know that. But I had to learn that kind of moving and trying to push, sometimes that would serve me. I had to adjust that to work in different environments and to work effectively with different people. So for those folks looking to learn and grow, still be authentic, I will say, look at those around you, people who inspire you, people who are interesting, and make sure you cast the net wide. Ensure that you're looking at diverse role models. How do they come to the table? How do they handle themselves in different meetings or within different classrooms, different settings? Watch and learn. You might pick up different skills about running a great presentation, asking powerful questions, project management. So I think that if we look and pay attention, and then the last one I want to say about authenticity is be playful with it. I think if we're so stuck and rigid and go, I'm just this way, we might lose the opportunities to learn and grow and thrive in different places.
Based off that, I'm curious, do you think, in terms of value, loyalty to the company, or do you think that we should be every 5, 10 years kind of reassessing our own values and our fit?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, and I love the idea of, again, checking in with yourself about your own values. And I think about, I just did that recently with a coach maybe 5 years ago. And it's really important to do that reassessment. The important thing is if you're within an organization, you might outgrow their value system. You might want something else. You might seek something else. There might be something that you're like, oh, this doesn't feel right. And then what does that? It tells you you're ready to reassess and move on to the next thing. Because we have to start thinking about what can I control? Can only control yourself, right? In evaluating your values, you will unlikely, unless you're, I don't know, senior leadership or within the HR team, begin to adjust what the values are of a particular organization.
Mhm.
So good question. And I like the assessment, and I also like and want to encourage people to be open to, yes, I'm going to be professional, and then what else can I try on in my zeal to just grow in my career.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that.
So I'm thinking and flipping it over to you. What do you think about when we're talking about professional standards and how they might be different for leaders and why that might happen? So, one of our, listeners had said, why might those professional standards for leaders sometimes be different?
Yeah, and
And
I love this question, especially as a sociologist, because I feel that we do very much, even as children, have this innate sense of injustice or inequality. I think about little kids feeling, something's unfair and having a little what do you call it when they're on the floor and they're having a little
little
mental break,
tantrum,
little
little
temper
tantrum.
tantrum, right? And we do that because we don't quite yet have the words to explain what we're feeling or what we're seeing or what we're experiencing. And I find
Mm.
that this is a big part of sociology, at least in my classes, where okay, we can say there is inequality here, there's discrimination here, there's whatever different issues that we're seeing and that we can kind of name, but why? Where does this come from? Like what is more so the depth of this? Like yes, inequality, but why? What is the basis of that? And I think that when we have the terminology to kind of describe and talk about it, we can really get further in our understanding and kind of moving past and working with those realities. So when it comes to why is it that the professionalism standards don't always apply to people in bigger or higher positions of power, we see that, right? Like we see lots of examples of that. And so, whatever. So, what we see is that leadership standards do tend to vary due to context, the organization, the goals, and then symbolic power is going to be a big one that I'm going to come back to. But leaders do adjust their standards and their goals and their style based on their own personal values and the way that they like to get things done and the way that they want other people to get things done. And this ends up influencing the company from top down, right? And it ends up kind of reinforcing their dominance because they're the ones setting the standards and therefore they have more flexibility and face fewer consequences when they don't actually meet those standards themselves.
Yeah.
Because they're the one who
And
set
can I,
it. They don't have to follow
yeah,
it, but
yes.
yeah.
And I want to share just one little story, just as you talked about more flexibility. And I'm thinking about working with a CEO who was not very consistent with timeliness of meetings, showing up, ending on time, showing up on time. And the tough thing, just kind of sharing, how that played out within the organization is there could be 40 managers showing up for a particular meeting, and then we could wait 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And often I would think, whew, this is an expensive meeting. But anyway, there
Yeah.
was just and there was a habit there in terms of the frequency of being delayed. And I do want to point out, I don't think that it would be appropriate for anyone else to have showed up late to
Absolutely
meeting.
not. Absolutely not. Yeah, so meetings are a great example where we tend to see this play out in action where, the boss is like everyone needs to be there at 8 a.m., but the boss might not show up till 8:05 or 8:10, right? And everyone's following those professional standards, but the boss who set them is not. And this has to do with there was a research paper by Stevens in 2004 where he was just writing about how executives are judged differently and based on different ethical standards, and they face fewer disciplinary consequences because surveillance flows downward, right?
Mm.
We have so many people to surveil the employees, or even people, the president supervising or superveiling the VPs, or the VPs or the HR manager supervising those below them, right? There's kind of this chain of command, but there's no one
Mhm.
above the people at the top. There's no one above the top executives and the CEOs. So there's plenty of people with surveillance to check on the lower level employees, but there's no one to really hold the CEOs accountable, right? Who's surveilling them? And his research paper just found that typically, like, higher level executives don't face any repercussion or consequences unless something really serious happens with
Yeah.
the company that they have to actually take accountability for. But at the end of the day, surveillance flows downwards, and there's really no one at the top to monitor the people at the top when we get to the top of the hierarchy, right? So meetings is a great example in terms of, the boss being like, everyone needs to be here at 8, but they don't need to be there at 8. Another example might be in office time, right? I feel like a lot of employees, I even know I have some friends who their computers track if they're
Yes.
at their computer.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
insanity to
Yes.
me. That's insanity, but okay. I'm not in that field, so I don't get it. But like, I can't imagine like someone kind of tracking my computer if I'm on my
Yeah.
computer, what I'm doing on my computer. So there's a lot of surveillance there, right, for the
Yes.
employees. But is
Yeah.
anybody surveilling the CEO and what he's doing on his computer and when he's at his computer and what he's looking at on his computer and the level of productivity that he's using when he's at
Right.
his computer?
Right. And
So it's
yeah.
just interesting because,
No.
we want all the employees to be in their seats and in the
Yes.
office, but there was a research paper I also read that I can link below where employ lower level employees spend like 2 to 3 times as much time in office as do the higher level executives.
Mhm.
Do you
Yeah.
notice that at all? Like, when you've been in corporate, have you seen that maybe the
Yes,
CEOs are
yep,
in office more time?
and you know it could, and you know that I'm going to come at this with my glass half full,
Yeah.
and so this is what I'll say. For I hear you in though what you're sharing again from a research perspective, and it is true. I want to talk about that surveilling employees, and I want you to know I was at an organization where they had suggested, yes, let's put this mechanism in place. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And then this is what we have to say, right? Because you can state, oh, well, we really want to measure productivity. But then this is where you need to think about what is the culture that you're aiming to create.
Mhm.
And, ironically, we say, and often we can have a whole other conversation on trust. How are we building trust? And through our words and our actions. And it's ironic, and this is where it goes back to the importance of values, both our own as well as within the organization. We can say, oh, we have a high level of integrity, or we have, teamwork, or we want you to be innovative. But then, so we say these things about but then we might show through small examples of we don't trust you because the office supplies are locked behind a door. Well, why is that? If again, you're looking for extra from your people, but then there's not a level of, showing or indicating that trust. I had another thought, but I lost
Right.
it.
Yeah, so another example, I know that we talked about dress code a little bit in our last episode, but just another example of kind of, well, symbolic capital, which I'm about to talk about. But so for dress code, for example, again, we have the people at the top setting certain dress codes, they're strict about it, it's enforced. But when we have the executives breaking the dress code, like maybe your boss comes in and is wearing a pair of sneakers, they might be seen as more authentic or more organic. Oh, okay, cool. Like, they're bending the rules a little bit. They're really lax. They're really fashionable. They're very whatever. Like, it's typically seen as, oh, more authentic or more respected. Whereas again, most employees, if they were to come to work wearing sneakers, it would be seen as unprofessional. But the executive does it in, oh wow, he's kind of cool. So we have this different level of accountability that we give different people. And even when executives tend to break their own rules, we almost perceive it as, oh wow, well, they're kind of flexible, they're kind of cool. So I just think that's kind of interesting. And then I also
Mm,
think a couple other examples would be email etiquette, where specifically as a woman, right, I have to almost stop myself from using so many exclamation points. I'm like, Alex, you got to chill. Like you're coming off
yep.
as friendly, but you're coming off as overly excitable at this point, right? But we have this
Mhm.
pressure to come off as very friendly and very open and very kind and whatever, right? Very
Yep.
feminine and so whatever we when I put together an email, even in my job in my career, when I'm emailing my bosses and my colleagues, I have very much a format that I follow that's very professional. It's, name, a greeting, I'm writing because of XYZ, thank you in advance for your time, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, best, Alex, right? Like I have a format and I stick with
Yes.
that because I'm trying to be professional. Um,
Mhm.
but we have CEOs and they'll send out an email like a text. And when
Yes.
they do that, we see it as, oh, efficient, or oh, they're really busy, so they didn't have time to put together the email in the professional way. Or largely, they're the boss, so they can do whatever they want, right? So we'll see an executive do that and be seen as again, efficient, quick, to the point, blunt, which we look up to. But if an employee were to do that, it's kind of seen as, again, unprofessional and I would, almost like, oh, why are you emailing like a text? I know that that kind of has like a negative connotation. Like, please don't
Yep.
email me like a text message. When my students
Right.
do that to me, email me like a text message, I have to be like, who is this? You didn't sign your name. I can't help
Yeah.
you if you don't at least sign your name and tell me like
Right.
what we're talking about here. But
Exactly.
so,
Yeah.
well, have
Yeah.
you noticed that at all in terms of like
Yes.
email etiquette?
I have. I've definitely seen that. And I think that this is incredibly important. So yes, there's that reality of, um, I'm in a more senior level role. I can maybe, change or flex or be different and original in how I show up. I
Yeah.
do want to say, I believe many of the leaders I've worked with have, I'm thinking about dress, have consistently shown, let's say a more very professional sort of conservative even dress. But I hear your point and the example of, um, and it's interesting. And I'm let's not get political, but I'm just going to share this as an example. Elon Musk showing up in the White House with a t-shirt, I think is a great example of that. There are known norms and standards for how you might show up within the White House in a suit and tie. And I think that there's been consistency there, but then there's a level of, and you'll speak better than I will on this, but privilege, prestige, money, power that
Yes, ma'am.
might allow him to say, no, I'm going to wear my t-shirt under
Yes,
my
ma'am.
jacket. So,
And so we have a word for that, right? And this is by Bourdieu or Bourdieu. It's a French name. I don't know, but he's a social theorist. And the word that I want to use to explain what you're talking about is symbolic capital. And just for a little bit of context, we have social capital, which is who you know. We have cultural capital, which is what you know. And then symbolic capital is more so like this credit that based off your prestige and your power makes it that your actions appear to be more valid and admirable. We kind of have this assumption that there's merit where executives are believed to have earned their autonomy, right? We have this prestige and this legitimacy that allow for executives to bend the norms without penalty. And this is based on titles, reputation, and our titles and our reputation and our prestige and our name being Elon Musk or being a CEO or whatever that label is that you have allows you this flexibility of your behavior and your actions to be seen as acceptable. And we can think of this in so many scenarios, like a doctor, right? We have kind of a white coat bias where we really trust people who are in a white coat, or we really trust doctors
yeah.
because they are doctors. That is
Mhm.
symbolic capital. They have this symbolic
Yeah.
power and ability to kind of bend the rules and do what they want to do because again symbolically, wow, this person's very respectable and very powerful and we're going to let them do what they need to do because they earned it. They earned their way up to that position, so therefore they can do what they want and whatever they're doing has legitimacy. And so there's a
Yep.
few words that Bourdieu kind of used within this idea of symbolic capital. So accumulated prestige. So again, executives carry titles that carry prestige, like CEO, VP, founder, and these signal authority. And then we
Mm.
have kind of the idea of cultural narratives, right? These are things that were socialized to understand in terms of leadership and seeing leaders as exceptional. We're very quick to excuse and even admire quirks of people in positions of power, like I was kind of saying.
Mm-hmm.
And these quirks might be something that are punishable for people in lower levels. So, for example, I can actually think of a direct example of this, and this is something that kind of drew me to sociology. I liked how lax everybody was, but now that I'm kind of talking about this, I'm thinking about how most all of my sociology professors, so again, kind of nuanced to sociology because they're very much for breaking the rules, but my professors would sit up on the table, kick their shoes off, cross their legs, and talk to us like that. Do I do that now? Yes, absolutely. But that's something that they can do because they've achieved that status, that prestige. They're the professor. You can't question them. And when she did that, I'm thinking of a professor. I won't, whatever, I guess I won't say her. Her name's Maggie. I
No.
loved her. Shout out to Maggie. And she was just so cool. She was so boho, and she would just come and kick her shoes off, sit on the table. And it was not perceived as unprofessional. It was perceived as cool and quirky.
Yeah.
But if someone
Yeah.
tried to do that without that symbolic capital, without that prestige, without that title, without that power, it would be seen as unprofessional. So it depends on who you are and the actions that you take part in, whether we find that to be cool or negative. And then the last thing that I'll say underneath Bourdieu's symbolic capital idea is organizational dependency. And this is
Mm.
just about how people fear challenging those who
Sure.
have the
Of
hiring and
course.
firing control, right?
Yeah.
So, and then you got to think, are the executives really worried about the hiring and firing if they're the ones doing it? There's less of that fear there. There's
Of
less
course.
people above you to complain or
Yeah.
so whatever. If you're the CEO, who's going to fire me? Or if you're the owner of the business, who's going to fire me? This is my business. Whereas lower
Yeah.
level employees do have that fear. So again, symbolic capital is this credit that we have based on prestige, position, titles that make
Mhm.
any of our actions seem valid and admirable, quirky, cute, even. And then
Mhm.
we have, again, accumulated prestige, cultural narratives, and organizational dependency in terms of how much we can really question authority and how much flexibility we have. And
Yeah.
so this just segues into the next question that we got from our listeners about
Hmm.
how do you advocate for yourself in an effective manner, keeping in mind the organizational dependency that as an
Yeah.
employee, you're dependent on this job to survive, and there are consequences to your actions.
Yes. And so love that question, and I'm going to go at it in a moment. But first, I'm going to pause with because I love the content and insight on symbolic capital. And I guess what I want to make sure for our leaders out there, listeners who are leaders, and again, functioning within the workplace and now have this awareness, right, of, oh my goodness, I do indeed carry the symbolic capital, and what do I do with it? I guess I just want to
Good
pose,
question.
and I've certainly spent many instances currently in coaching leaders, and then certainly within the HR capacity, reminding leaders that people watch you. They're watching you all the time. And even when you don't realize it, and the smallest things from where you park. Are you in the preferred parking spaces or not? And how you dress and what time you show up and who you're having lunch with. And again, the time in the office and so on. So I just want to put it out there. And I think that there are a lot of um, highly functioning, super talented leaders that I've worked with who care about this deeply. And I do think there's a trend of leaders becoming more and more aware of this power, of its influence within the organization. And I do believe that a lot of leaders care deeply about the well-being in the culture that they're creating. So that's me with my glass half full. You know that, that's where I live. But I just wanted to make sure that I say a couple of things to have leaders think about that, and then what do you do with it? Back to your question, how do our listener asked, how do I advocate for myself in an effective manner? So first and foremost, know why you are advocating for yourself. And I think this is important. What is your brand? What are your goals? What are the ideas that you want to share? What is the voice? What do you want to learn? What do you want to gain? So there's so many reasons as to, why you might want to advocate for yourself. And I think we need to do that just as human beings. We're constantly advocating. This question has me think about, geez, and this is another podcast, Alex, you kind of thinking about advocating for yourself like as a child, but that might take us down another really interesting road. So in the workplace, know why you want to do it. I think that that's important. And then as you're thinking about that, I want to here's some how you might advocate some strategies, and I'm going to give you a little acronym to remember, and it's ACT. So A is for align. Align with the outcomes that you're looking for. Align with the outcomes you're looking for. And I'm going to give an example as we walk through this, because I think it's often someone might say, how do I advocate for more money or for a promotion? Okay, so compensation or promotion. So first of all, you know what the outcome is. You want an increase in pay or you want a promotion. Then C, commit. You need to commit to the work, to really knowing and understanding the organization. I'd be friends with HR people and wanting to understand, what I mean? What are the policies and practices around, learning and development, and what does it take? What are the core competencies that I need to perfect? What is the performance management cycle? And do the work. Do the work for yourself and go on a fact-finding mission, know it well, collect data and facts, and then also build relationships. And I think that's incredibly important in no matter what environment you're at. I know we're talking about the workplace here, but I would imagine certainly within academia as well, and you can talk about that, but relationships matter. Build those relationships, be intentional, ask questions. And the last one is the letter T, which is for time and energy mastery. Just so ACT. Now, what are you going to put your time into? Time for learning, time for development, time for relationships, thinking about where your boundaries are, right? Because you can't say yes to everything. So though that's what I'll leave the audience with in terms of how to best advocate for yourself. And as we always encourage questions, I'd love any comments or feedback on that. But I'll pause there, Alex, and see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so kind of, I think one of the questions also from the audience was, is there a professional way to push back? Whether
Yeah.
that, I think that they were asking specifically about a supervisor, but again, as someone in academia, I'm going to address this question as almost how do you push back against a professor, specifically, because I have some funny stories regarding that. And I think, Mom, I think that you'll kind of laugh at my answers and maybe not like the terminology that I use, so you can help me develop that. But the first one is very basic in terms of, and I'm thinking about how I would want to communicate with a professor of mine, and then I'm also thinking about as a professor how I want people to communicate with me. Respect is a huge one. Starting
Mhm.
there, right? If you are respectful about what you're asking me or about what you need, odds are I'm going to respect it back and understand and hear you out at the very least, right? And for me, at least personally. But I do want to say the question's kind of interesting because it depends on the supervisor and the professor and who you're talking to, right? Everybody has their own leadership styles. Um,
Yes.
but for me, if you come in and you're respectful and you're asking for something and you're asking for something in a decently clear and direct way, I really respect that. I respect self-advocation. I respect when people come and ask me for what they need and aren't beating around the bush or trying to allude to something or trying to suggest to something. Tell me what you need. Tell me what you need so we can move forward and we can, actually find a solution for this. But if you're gonna kind
Yes.
of beat around the bush with me and I don't know what you're asking, that I don't know how to help you. Right. I really do respect when people are straightforward to some degree, respectful, know what they need, right? There's some respect in the fact that you know what you need, and then I know how I can help you, right? And just like a silly story, this past semester, at one of my universities, I had a student who failed an assignment, um, just was objectively wrong. I'm so sorry to this student, was objectively wrong with her answers. I wasn't really seeing any effort. There weren't even full sentences. There wasn't even punctuation in this submission. It was just kind of a mess overall.
Mm.
And she came up to me after her grade and was like livid,
Mm.
was upset, was like very upset. I understand being upset about your grade, but don't be upset at me. Like there's a rubric and there's directions and you didn't follow those objectively, right? And so she was upset and she was trying to say that it was my fault and we can put this as a leader or whatever, like, well, you didn't give the right directions or you didn't do this
Mhm.
correctly or you didn't explain or you didn't
Yeah.
really vocalize that, right? If she had came up and said, I misunderstood the directions, can you help me understand? And is there any way I could resubmit this for partial credit? I would have been like, absolutely, absolutely. So coming up, there's some degree of humbleness, clarifying where it is that you're confused, what it is that you need, whether that's further instruction and direction, if you need more time, if you need an extension, if you need another chance, if you want to whatever. That's what I'm saying. I like that. I like when you're asking for what you need, you're taking responsibility for whatever, you're asking for help. You're going to get whatever you need if you ask in that type of way,
Yeah.
personally.
And then what, you know what, I love what you're saying because it opens up the conversation about what is the definition of respect in for who. And I'm going to just play on one thing that you said, and I hear you, is you said like I want you to be direct. And then I would just want to present with different cultural norms might direct be an uncomfortable approach for some. And
Oh,
I'm just
yeah.
posing that as a
Yeah.
us generating awareness that people are going to come differently. And we're going to have, right, these frameworks that we're talking
Yep.
about. And this is where it comes back to how important naming what are you on your rubric, how can you succeed in this class? And then the same thing in the workplace. Here are operating principles. Like this is how we do good work, how we, succeed and grow in our careers. It's and how we need to show up. Those are the standards and rules. But I was just kind of wanted to play on that. Cultural
Yeah,
differences might exist too. Yeah, of
absolutely. And as a professor, I try to be aware of those as well.
course.
And I would say through culture, or at least in the US, being, well, it's funny. It's funny. Actually, people from other cultures, other countries find us as people of the United States to be very direct, but I still think that we
Ah,
struggle with directness. That
right.
is a perception of us from other countries that we're almost too direct or very direct. But I still think that we struggle with being direct and asking for what we need. And I think that can sometimes come back to maybe not knowing what it is that we need. So I would
Mm,
suggest before going into a conversation like this, talking to yourself, having a moment. What
yeah,
is it that I'm looking for? What is it that I need? What am I trying to
yeah,
get out of this conversation? And I think if you go into any conversation pre-thinking about that, it's going to go much better, right? And then this is the part that I know that you won't like this terminology and I need your help with. But in terms of being professional and pushing back and getting what you need, be manipulative. Be manipulative, right? Like sometimes you have to humble
yeah,
yourself and like this isn't maybe the way that you'd want to say it and maybe you really want to say this to them and maybe you really want to put them in their place or really you want to lay it out this way. If you want to get what you want to get, you gotta play the game a little bit. You gotta be a little bit manipulative. You gotta really tune into who that leader is, who you're trying to confront, what's their style, what are their values, what are their maybe cultural norms. Is it annoying that you have to appease that? Absolutely. Should you have to? No. Is it the reality? Yes, I think so. And I think that there's some degree of being aware of who you're talking to and what they want to hear. You know what I mean? Or feeding their ego to some degree, even if you don't like them or don't want to have this conversation. I think if you want to get what you want to get, there's some degree of manipulation, but I'm sure you have a better word for that than what I'm trying to say.
Yes, yes, I don't. I hear what you're saying. I wouldn't think that it is manipulation. This is what I would say, and this is going back to the what we were talking about in regards to the authenticity. And I do want to highlight there's a great article out called Authenticity Paradox. I know we'll put it as a link, but go check that out. So I'm going to go back and kind of speak to some of the content within is you're not manipulating as much as I would say you're adjusting. You're
Okay.
adjusting in learning, right, the nuance of who that individual is. And
Yeah.
Alex, we can kind of talk about it, and we have, we need to do that with generational differences, right? We're going to do that with people who work in different departments. We're going to do that with people with different titles. I think and I think that that's a healthy thing. I think that relationships end up being more successful, I would say. And I'm going to argue this. I'm not suggesting people lose themselves. I'm not suggesting that back to your point, I'm coming into the meeting. I'm being clear with what I want to get out of this. I'm being clear with my outcome. And I want to encourage this going back to that authenticity paradox. Adjust, try a couple of different ways, because at the end of the day, I think about the most friction within the workplace is just because of it's differences and tension that come from relationships. I can't work with that person, or I just their style. And it's like, but I think that is true success when you can actually try to build a bridge with those folks where it's quite different. Or you could say manipulate, but I'm going to stay with adjust.
Adjust as well. And I think that whatever, I'll move on, but I think adjust is interesting because definitely, whatever. We need to give or take and adjust in life. But I think why I was saying manipulate because I, even with a partner, even with your friend, even with your mom, even with a sibling, you need to adjust a little bit, right? Um, but I think that, for example, when it comes to maybe having a cranky boss, I think if I was in my head thinking, oh, let me just adjust to him, I would be so mad. I would be so mad. I would be like, why do I have to adjust to you? And that's why I think that I use the word manipulate because it
Yeah.
gives me a little bit more power where it's like, ooh, I'm thinking this out. I'm thinking ahead and I'm going to get what I want, whether I like this guy or not, or this girl or not. I don't have to go home with this person. I get to leave work, whatever. I know you have to work together a lot, but I think kind of reclaiming power in that adjustment, right? And
Yeah.
not feeling like you said, not feeling like you're losing yourself and giving up your own values and standards to adjust to this person because let's be real, they're probably not adjusting back to you. They're
Hmm.
probably not adjusting back to you. So that's why I don't, and I'll think about a better word or terminology, but I think it's nice for me sometimes even just to be like, okay, well, can I frame this in a way where I have the power? Can I frame this in a way where I feel like I'm in control? Can I frame this in a way where whatever this is on me and I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna get what I want and I'm being smart about this and I'm doing what I gotta do to do that
Yeah.
because I do think I would be exhausted if I had to adjust to everybody all the time, especially my higher ups versus like a friend or family.
Hmm.
That makes
Hmm.
sense. I'm
Yeah.
trying to just
No.
put more power in it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just going to ask a question, and we'll save it for a future conversation is I think about remember that the adjustment is maybe more for you than it is for the other person
True. True.
if it's
I'll take that.
connected to the outcome that you want. So
I'll
just
take
something
that.
to think
I'll
about.
take
Just
that.
something.
No, I can see that. I can see that.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Mm,
That's fair.
mm,
Totally,
yeah.
totally. But then as we kind of said, we would talk a little bit about hybrid and remote kind of
Yeah.
work shifts. We got a question from a listener who said, let's see, what should I keep in mind regarding changes in standards of professionalism within hybrid and remote work settings? And this could be dress codes, your Zoom background, animals barking, things like that.
Yeah. And I think this is such a great question because it's very real. And I think that what to keep in mind, start with this. Ask your employer or your professor or your boss what matters most within our, help me out. And then what I want to say to leaders are, please be very clear with the expectations and standards of how we're going to show up in a remote environment. So I'll tell you just a couple of stories where it can kind of go off the rails. One, if you're not clear about, please put up the company backdrop. Many organizations today have a nice Zoom background. Let your people know that you want them to use it consistently. That's key. If and I just had a really neat conversation with a leader on this topic, and he's like, we were talking about professionalism. He goes, I don't know that I want to see someone's bed behind them. I don't know that I want to see the door open, maybe with a stack of dishes or the toilet. And then the funny thing, Alex, and is, but how do people know that? How do
Yes.
people know that? And then
Yes.
again, so again, I want to put the push and pressure on leaders because guess what? You're leaders for a reason. You've got more expectation and pressure to ensure clarity and consistency. So with your remote environment, just let your people know. Let them know. Use the backdrop. This, and then here I was talking to a friend of mine who said, I was in, meetings and I'm used to, let's say, a sense of formality, but then he ends up going into another meeting where that formality had kind of fallen off. So meaning like talking about a boss, maybe the baseball hat's on or backwards, or again, casual golf shirt, the shirt and tie has gone away. And all I want to say to Liz, share that with your people. So, meaning, for example, when we have meetings with external people, vendors or suppliers or customers or just external stakeholders, we will dress and show up in this manner. And because that's part of our brand. And to your point, Alex, why? Tell why we're going to show up that way. And then when we have internal meetings, we're a little bit more casual. And then this is what, dress or how we can show up. I've had an organization who's very frustrated with an employee who would come into meetings lying down on the couch, lying down on her couch. Well, no one told her that. So it comes back to, yep, a leader with all their seasoned years of experience, they might think like, geez, doesn't everyone know that? And I just want to say, no, not everyone does. So let's just be clear with our standards, because I think that there are still expectations about how we show up online. And then I want to say to individuals is, what do you want to be known for? And then go through that lens. What do you want to be known? What do you want your professor to think? What do you want your boss to think, or your, again, external stakeholders? So think about that.
Yeah, totally agree with everything that you're saying because I think that our main conversation about this has been about the fact that we grow up in different places with different people and we have different socialization experiences. We absorb different things as we grow up based on where we are and with who. We cannot assume that everybody just has this
Yes.
kind of cultural workplace knowledge. If your parents don't work in the workplace and you don't have anybody, any mentors who work in the workplace and you enter corporate for the first time, we can't just assume that these people know things. And so that was you already addressed it, but I think there needs to be more responsibility on the leaders and the organization to either set really clear standards. When you say, oh, we want you to look professional on Zoom, what does that mean? Lay it out, explain to people. And then, yeah, so I think explaining to people as people in power, maybe that's having workshops, right? Here's how you write an email. here's ways to improve your resume. Here's ways to improve communication styles. Here's ways, like, I think that it would be really cool if that was a part of corporate. Just once in a while, some professional development or something about the standards at the specific workplace and expectations and just whatever, being clear about expectations
Yeah.
and whatever. And I think that there's also not only from leaders but from colleagues. I think if you have a colleague that you see is struggling or is not the you know the nuance, the rules aren't clicking with, or it's something that they're not familiar with, maybe that's something you could help someone with. Like just saying,
Yeah.
rather than looking down upon someone and, oh, they're so unprofessional, they must not care, they must not take this seriously. Maybe they just don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe they just don't know. And I think that that's
It,
huge.
yeah.
Go ahead.
How is it in the classroom, the online classroom environment? And
Yeah,
is how important is it? Like, I'm sure that you have standards, of course. I'm sure there's expectations in the syllabus, but what?
I don't have either of those. So,
Oh,
so I am being a little bit what's the word? A little whatever, a little ironic right now in my advice, but I'll be so honest and say I struggle with the whole Zoom etiquette thing. I I think part of it is because I'm so close to being a student. I just graduated about 2 years ago at this point, which feels wild to me. I feel like it was just yesterday. But I remember I hated having to put my camera on. Hated it.
uh,
Leave me alone, please. Everybody else has their cameras off. I want my camera off. What are we doing? Right? Like, just hated
mm,
it. Especially having like 4 hour classes in grad school. Like, you're just exhausted. I might be on my couch. I might be in a t-shirt. I don't want to turn my camera on, but I'll engage. But as a professor, therefore I do the same thing. You don't need to have your camera on. You don't need to, I don't care. I don't care if you're in your pajamas, if you're in your bed, if you logged in and you're in class and you're engaging, I'm cool with that, right? But there are there are consequences to that in terms of, and now I feel for my professors, I'm talking to a blank screen. I'm talking
yes.
to a blank screen. But unfortunately, like even now, as I'm just saying this out loud, that's an inconvenience just to me. Just to me personally. It's just a discomfort for me personally. Does it impact much else? I would have to think about it. But
Right.
really, it's a personal, oh man, I kind of hate talking to a black screen. And I'm sure that my professors hated the same thing. But then I think the question we need to ask ourselves, and again, this is something that I'm figuring out right now and trying to reflect on, is whatever standards that I set, I need to know why I'm setting them. And for
Mm,
me, it needs to be beyond personal discomfort or it needs to be
yeah.
beyond personal preference for me. There needs to be a
Right.
reason. But I do
Yeah.
know that I have like fellow professors who are colleagues who do require a camera on in class. And not only
Mm,
that, they want you to dress professionally as well. And
interesting.
and their reasoning for that could be, hey, I'm prepping you for the real world where you will have to either go in person and dress up somewhat, or you might have Zoom meetings where you still need to be professional and dress up. And so she's probably providing experience for them to be prepared for the workplace. So
Yeah.
if I'm thinking about requiring my students to have their camera on, I would just want to check in with myself as to why. Is this because it's a personal preference and what I want? Or is it because there might be a benefit for my students in doing this? So whatever,
Right.
just in general with standards, especially like online, just whatever, being aware of why we're asking certain things online or not, be aware of why we have certain standards and that it's not just our preference and our own bias and what we prefer, but something that's
Yeah.
actually going to benefit everybody involved.
Right. And I know that we have two more questions to get to, so we'll move over there. But I want to share because I can't help myself. I'm like always like I want to move and fix things, which I should not. But I'll offer. I'm just curious about the why and how the actual learning experience could be enhanced. I'll just leave that just as a thought. I don't know.
Yeah.
Meaning with the camera on. And might it be on for a percent of the time? And again, I don't know. Okay.
Yeah. No, I
All right.
agree. It's something I totally need to think about.
Yeah.
But speaking about showing up
Yeah.
online or not, in presenting yourself. One of my favorite questions, I think that you and I really did a deep dive into, because I think we disagreed at first. The question is, does how you dress impact how you feel? And I think
Yeah.
you and I have always kind of had a little bit of disconnect here because, like I've
Yes.
said, I don't care what my students wear as long as they're in class. I don't
Yes.
know that what I wear should really have an impact on my efficacy in terms of getting my job done or the content that I know or the knowledge that I have. I think I have the same exact knowledge whether I'm wearing a cute shirt or a sweatshirt. I still have the same
Mhm.
knowledge. And I
Yeah.
still have the same thing to provide for my students. And I think that that's important. And I think even sending that message is important. And I've had my students say that they appreciate how I dress pretty lax sometimes because, and mom, this is kind of me getting a little bit personal here. I don't feel like I ever had until I really got to Howard. I don't think I had anybody as a professor or a teacher who looked like me. And not even just demographic wise, but way of dress, demeanor, attitude, whatever. And I think that when you do see all of these people, like just again, professors who are in a suit and tie and a button up, which you don't see too often, but whatever. But you might not visualize yourself in that role because there's such a
Ah,
separation here, right? And
yeah.
so I think that I never knew that I wanted to be a teacher because I never visualized myself in that role. And I think that
Mm.
some of my students feel, oh, wow, look at her. She's a young woman of color. She dresses comfortably. She's not up here all stuffy. Maybe I can visualize myself in that role. And I
Ah,
think that's important. But of course,
okay.
balance, of course,
Yeah.
balance. But what do
Yeah.
you think in terms of dress and does that impact how you feel?
Yeah. And I just thank you for sharing again your depth and your view. And I think that you're talking about right representation. Did I see myself in right out in again different again, whether it's within the workplace or whether it's in within student life, in academia. I think you bring up a really good point there about, do I see myself? But going to the question that we got from our listeners that was like, does, how you dress impact the way you feel? I'll talk about myself personally, and then I'll talk about like what I believe and have seen and also researched. So one, I have always consistently felt better in terms of my ability to focus, show up, how I'm going to conduct myself again with others or within a meeting, the able to get work done, conducting a meeting, whatever it might be. I always felt more ready, polished, and also credible. I'll say that I felt that way based on how I dressed. And then I do
You feel more
believe, and
respected as well, do you feel?
say that again.
You feel like you feel more respected at all?
You know what's interesting, and I love that? I respect myself more.
Uh, mm,
I respect
mm,
myself more.
cute, mom,
And
cute.
and I think that with that respecting self and Alex, and I'm with you, we can show up in again different dress code. And of course I'm going to link it to, what's the job that you have, right? Whether they're safety or a salesperson or an insurance broker, whatever it might be, it's going to vary. But I think that, yeah, I think you kind of maybe owe it to yourself or to think about if that matters to you. And then I think that, and we've heard, certainly within corporate, dress for the job that you want. I'm going to go back to some of the things we said earlier. Pay attention to the environment. Pay attention to, again, the work and the job that you want. Pay attention to, and again, pull, again, different pieces that make sense for you as you're thinking about how you might want to dress. But, and I know we'll share this article for people to reference, but there is data that does show your productivity is impacted. I think, relationships, certainly how people are going to view you are impacted, opportunities are impacted. And I'll leave it there and toss it to you because I know you have a lot more to share from your own research and findings, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. I'd be curious about the paper that you have, and I have a few research findings I want to share as well.
Mhm.
My question is, when we say, does dressing for success still matter? Are we talking about dressing in a specific way, or are we talking about dressing in a way where you feel good and comfortable? Because I almost feel like those are two separate things, like trying to appease this very professional, stuffy view, and then there's showing up in a way where you feel really good about yourself and you feel confident and you feel strong.
Yeah,
You
it
know?
it's such a great question, and I think that it's such a delicate nuance
Yeah,
because I would say make sure you name what for success feels for you,
right,
and then staying on the corporate environment. But based on the work that you're doing and the job that you want and the organization that you're working at, you need to pay attention to those standards. And I'm going to make this up. This is silly, but let's say someone wants to be, I don't know, super casual and wear sweatpants and that matters. Well, don't get a sales job because it's
right,
unlikely that you're going to go work in any sales organization that maybe you're going to show up in that casual mode. So there
right.
has to be alignment there. And then I'm going to share just one other example to show the nuance. At my last corporate job, I worked alongside a gentleman who was a beautiful dresser. So this was a pretty, I shared with you, a very conservative type of environment. We, wear the suit and tie sort of thing. And this gentleman who was a beautiful dresser, one other thing that would have been um, a part of dress that was individual to him was to wear an earring, to wear a stud. And I remember him having a conversation with me about should I wear it or not? And, I kind of asked him, why not? Or, what would that be if you did? And encouraged him to be himself. He
Love, love
ma-
that.
made the decision to not wear it based on what he was seeing from senior leadership, which did not, to your point of representation, there was really no deviation from um,
Right,
shirt,
right.
tie, cufflinks, polished shoes,
Yeah,
again, just that traditional look. So I want to
yeah.
just share that. And then that ends up being a personal decision. And that's where I feel like there's
Yeah.
just a true nuance on
Well,
landing on this.
I'm trying to allow, yeah, for that nuance and that personal decision making because, yeah, so the standard is dressing professionally, right? You gotta, and we're not talking about it. I hear what you're saying. If you want to wear sweatpants, do a job where you can wear sweatpants, right? But
Yeah.
let's say you're at a job and there is a professional standard of dress. I still think, let's say, let's just say it's me and I'm a professor and I should dress like a professor. Um, how can I do that in a way where I feel comfortable? Maybe, or I'm thinking about women in the workplace, and maybe you're supposed to wear a dress or a pencil skirt, but maybe I feel more comfortable in a pantsuit, or maybe I feel more comfortable in a blazer and like da da da. But maybe I don't want to wear a dress. Maybe I don't want to wear the florals and the pinks. Maybe I want to wear what up. I guess I'm trying to say that you can still find yourself and what makes you comfortable and confident within certain restrictions. I personally would say push those restrictions, wear the earring, wear the stud, let your tattoo show, whatever it is that you want to do, you know what I mean? But find what you can do that makes you feel like you within those policies and standards because dressing just exactly like your higher up, maybe as an example, maybe you don't feel confident in that. So I'm like,
Mhm.
still find your own authenticity, your own, your own originality within the guidelines. Because unfortunately, although I would like to say, screw the guidelines, we can't do that. We still live in a world, there's still are policies. You still need to dress appropriately for wherever, whatever context you're in. But I would just challenge find a way to make that authentic to you and just make sure that you are comfortable and that you feel good and that you feel confident because this segues into the research that I found, which I'm glad that I did because again, I think I personally dress very lax as a professor, and I've been working on it. I've been working on it. I've been
I know.
dressing up a little bit more, not too fancy, but to a point where I feel comfortable and I feel good and I feel confident, right?
Yeah.
And that's been
Hmm.
really nice for me. And I do feel that when I teach, I do feel that kind of extra confidence when I feel really good. I can still have days where I'm wearing a sweatshirt and jeans and still feel really, really good, right? It just kind of depends. But I did, based off these conversations with my mom about dress code, find a few interesting research papers. And I have one that I will share in the description because it's kind of a overall lit review of prior research on dress and performance. And so while my mom was more so talking about how the way that you dress can make you feel. The research that I did was more so on like actual, actual differences based on level of dress. And
Mm.
so most of all these studies are a little bit different, but for the most part, they're comparing people who dressed up very formally versus people who wore their everyday clothes. So we found that dressing up and again, feeling confident in what you're wearing increases abstract thinking. It leads to more confidence when it comes to negotiating. We also see improved results in attention demanding tasks. So it might help you pay attention. We
Mhm.
also see that when participants dressed formally, they made stronger impressions during the job interview. They actually rated themselves more positively after their interview and how they felt like they did. They
Mm.
also displayed more assertive behaviors. Like, for example, the people who dress nicer, they would actually pull their chair up closer to the
Yeah.
interviewer during the
Hmm.
interview, and they tended to speak more confidently, and they actually requested higher salaries and used more assertive language overall. So we do
Mm.
see that, and this is the results of research over the past 20, 25 years. So this is something consistent that we found that people perform better
Mm.
and make more assertive moves when they do dress up and feel good about themselves. So I have to say, Mom, you win there in terms of does dressing up impact how you feel? It not only impacts how you feel, but it impacts your outcomes and your success and your confidence and your ability to navigate certain situations and do so in a more efficient manner.
Yeah. Yeah. That was fascinating. I loved, learning about that research. Didn't realize that existed. So good stuff. All
Absolutely.
right. So as we're moving towards wrapping up, what final thoughts do you have that you'd like to share?
Okay, so I have a few and I'll make them quick,
Yeah.
but I would
Yeah.
say, first of all, keep in mind professionalism is contextual, cultural, and it's not equally enforced. Professional standards are, again, unequal and context dependent, and this has a lot to do with symbolic capital, which shapes what is professional, right? Communication norms and appearance norms are still shaped by power and perception. And when it comes to leadership, we need to see leaders who model inclusivity and clarity about what they expect in terms of professionalism and communication and dress. And that inclusive leadership overall requires clarity, curiosity, and accountability. And the way that you model your leadership to everybody else is going to have a large impact on success of the organization, as well as, I think, retention of your employees in terms of creating a space that is safe and comfortable for people to express themselves in a professional manner.
Yeah.
But keeping in mind that as a leader, you do have that symbolic capital. How
Hmm.
are you going to use that? How are you going to
Yeah.
use that power and influence that you have? So I would just challenge you there. And for all of us, I guess my general challenge would be dress up one day, dress up tomorrow, dress up really nice, dress up nicer than you typically do. Throw on that blazer, put on a nice gold necklace, put on your bracelets and your rings, wear your cute high heels. And I'd be curious, do you feel any better at work that next day? Or do you feel uncomfortable? Do you feel more confident? Do you feel more successful? Do you feel like you've been more efficient? I would be so curious to hear in the comments about how that might actually impact you or not. But Mom, do you have any final statements before I wrap it up?
Yeah, no, it was a beautiful summary there, and I'll just end on the leadership side is just that we do our modeling and what we say and we do and represent just creates the culture that we want. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome, Mom. So with that, thank you all for tuning in. We are so grateful to be able to engage in this content and discussion with you, and we are really looking forward to exploring more nuances regarding women in the workplace in our next podcast series, where we will discuss, again, women in the workplace and why men are seen as bosses and women are seen as bossy. So, of course, as always, our sources will be listed in the description. Please don't hesitate to leave any comments or questions in the comment section. And you can still always email us at themotherdaughterdownload@gmail.com. We look forward to talking with you all soon. I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, Mom.
Bye.